Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. Released this week, an ancient Chinese war, a flight simulator for the Game Boy, and a Disney cult classic gets a not-so-great game adaptation. I'm your host, Jared, and today is May 13th, 1992. Romance of the Three Kingdoms is a massive, long-running series of strategy games by Koei. Originally debuting in 1985 for computers and the NES, this week we saw the release of the second one for the Super NES, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2. Don't be fooled by its primitive UI. This is an incredibly in-depth strategy game. Romance of the Three Kingdoms sacrifices graphical power for some incredibly breathtaking complexity. The amount of options you have is crazy. For starters, you have a bunch of different scenarios to choose from, covering different periods of highly fictionalized Chinese history. And it's not just a contest of which side has more and/or better soldiers. There are all kinds of tactics like being able to forge letters, make alliances, and even recruit enemy officers. It also has a multiplayer mode where you can have up to 12 players at a time, albeit all taking turns on the same controller. Screw Mario Kart's battle mode. I know how I'm spending my sleepovers now. I'm just kidding. I don't have 12 friends. As a result, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2 received positive reception for its impressive scale and complex mechanics. Provided that you can adapt to the dated and slower aspects of the gameplay, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2 is still a really good early strategy game. Just be sure to keep that instruction manual nearby you. There's a lot going on there. If you're not familiar with Romance of the Three Kingdoms, it itself being based on the ancient 3rd century historical text, The Records of the Three Kingdoms, you've likely heard of one of its many spin-offs. Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the game, would also help spawn titles such as Dynasty Warriors in 1998, which is a one-on-one fighting game before it became a Musou franchise, Kessen 2 for the PlayStation 2 in 2001, Dynasty Warriors Empire's Dynasty Tactics, and eventually a bizarre crossover episode with Pokemon Conquest, in which characters from Romance of the Three Kingdoms would get into tactical battles with their Pokemon. The franchise is still going. Romance of the Three Kingdoms 14 was released for the PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch in 2020. Taking combat off the ground and into the skies is Turn and Burn, released this week in 1992 for the Nintendo Game Boy. It was very ambitious for the time, being a 3D flight simulator, sorta. It proudly proclaimed features like complete 3D movement, a radar, dynamic takeoff and landings. Of course, the Game Boy wasn't exactly a graphical powerhouse, so a lot of sacrifices needed to be made. It bears a strong familiarity to Top Gun for the NES. It's essentially the same concept and gameplay, just crunched down to a Game Boy-sized cartridge. Turn and Burn received decent reviews with praise for its technical achievements. GamePro mentioned how they liked its nifty hardware with a cockpit computer screen and 2 nicely detailed graphic displays. The game, of course, sucks. It sucks a lot. No idea how game reviewers were so lenient then, because if you try to play it now, you'll only notice how it's a clunky, slow-paced, unexciting title that, quite frankly, probably should not have been made for the Game Boy. If nothing else, it served as a stepping stone for its SNES sequel 2 years later, Turn and Burn, No Fly Zone. The sequel is much better. There was a long period of time where it seemed like any movie possible would get a video game adaptation. In May of 1992, the movie game was Disney's The Rocketeer.
What's an innocent girl like Jenny Blake
Keep your eyes open for this dame.
doing in a dangerous adventure like this?
He's got the girl!
You kidnapped me.
They want to swap Jenny for the rocket.
She's turning on the charm,
This is an emergency.
turning up the heat,
Hand over the rocket!
and she's got what it takes
Don't give it to him, please. Stop!
to take on the world.
Backward!
The Rocketeer, rated PG.
Now playing at a theater near you.
The movie was released in 1991 and is based on the comic of the same name. It tells the story of a stunt pilot turned jetpack wielding superhero. To this day, it's still fondly regarded as one of Disney's hidden gems. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for its video games. The Rocketeer was made for the NES and SNES, with both games playing very differently. The NES version came out closer to when the movie did and is a below average platformer. The SNES version is a below average everything. It tried to cram in so much. Racing, shooting, fighting, all of it sucked. Okay, the comic book style cutscenes are actually pretty cool. Ideally, a game should stick with a few concepts and try to make them work. This one didn't. The first two levels are a bizarre plane flying sequence that is so incredibly difficult and frustrating, most people never get to see the later levels in which you actually get to be the Rocketeer. Those levels include janky, nauseating shooting galleries, followed by more awful flying stages, a boring shoot 'em up with enough slowdown to make it feel like it lasts an eternity, and finally, a clumsy, awkward beat 'em up section. It's known now that the Rocketeer sucks really bad, and when it came out in the 90s, reviews weren't kind either. Electronic Gaming Monthly called it underwhelming, but they did give it praise for its, quote, innovative and exciting graphics. In fact, all 4 reviewers for EGM basically said it had good graphics.
Wow, the hottest graphics we've ever seen. Introduces a sense of reality never before seen on the Super NES. Sets a new standard in video game animation. Superb! It's like playing the fucking movie!
Really, man? Are we looking at the same thing here? This week I counted 3 total releases, 2 Super Nintendo games and 1 Game Boy game. This May is rather light on releases, giving us a full Nintendo pie. Over in the collector's corner, by far the biggest value gainer this time around is Romance of the Three Kingdoms 2. It was released with an MSRP of $59.99 and a loose copy will run you just over $25. A complete copy, on the other hand, will run you just over $250. Fairly respectable, but it is eclipsed by the far more valuable NES version. Turn and Burn released with an MSRP of $29.95 and a loose copy can be obtained for less than $5. However, complete Game Boy games are rare and this one will run you $69. Nice. Disney's The Rocketeer is by far the biggest value dropper this week. A loose cart is very cheap at less than $10, and a complete copy is worth only $30, about half of its value when it first launched. And that's it for today. Next week, we have a unique Super Nintendo RPG from a surprising source, a port of an arcade RPG, and bees. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Be sure to click the like video and subscribe if you aren't already, and leave a comment down below, especially if you had to play any of these games. Like The Rocketeer, I recall renting The Rocketeer so much as a kid, I had no idea that the video game was complete trash until having to do it for this video. I'm glad I missed out on that one.